Zana, the famous Zana Linda, famous in Exupéry and beyond. So Zana teaches English language and literature at DP level and also at GCSE and grade 10. Has a lot of experience teaching literature and as well is a scholar who studied in different universities, including Oxford. So we're very, very happy to have you here today, Zana, and you have the floor.
Okay, thank you so much. Very welcome, everyone. I'm always using any opportunity to talk about literature. So there we are. I will even come on Saturday to talk about it. So, okay, so it all really started. Oh, perfect. Our head of school. You were on the list and you're here.
You're fine. No, I'm
all right. So it all really started with me noticing something quite curious. People would ask me, what is it that you do? And I would say, I'm a literature teacher. And I would be very particular about stressing that I teach literature. I do not teach language. God forbid someone thought I would teach grammar. It's almost offensive. And then I started analyzing this, and I was, where does this come from? That's not normal, because I do teach language. Everything we do in a classroom in English, every single teacher, they teach language. Me in particular. Yes, I do not teach grammar. Yes, we do not do set topics of discussion about food and travel. But for me to claim that I'm not a language teacher, that's really ironic, I would say. So can we have the next slide? Yes, so I chose this great quotation by the poet Ezra Pound. And actually he said that great literature is a language charged with meaning to the utmost possible degree. And we will not discuss what great literature is, because that would be a whole discussion there. But I think something that makes literature different from just learning language in, let's call it the classical or traditional way, is that there is so much added meaning to it that the students are excited to learn it, whether they want to or not. And I had a student that I will discuss who has been in my class previously and sometimes still says that she would want to come back. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. So first of all, I really want to explain where we are coming from ourselves. So at the school here, several years ago, we actually trialed a model where for English language learners, we actually taught only literature. And that was not very successful, because what happened was we have so many people with so many different language levels that they ended up in a class where there was no way for them to succeed. And Masha allowed me to use her as an example, because she had an A2 level when she joined the class, and she ended up in an advanced literature course. And that was not a great time for her at all. And so, we did whatever we could to support her, but there was just no way for her to be successful. So we started rethinking this idea. We cannot just make everyone study literature, right? So we introduced a different model now, where grades 6 to 8, we teach both what is classically thought of language, so grammar and set topics, but also literature. And every year students study prose, drama, and poetry. And then in grades 9 to 10, when they start preparing for the IGCSE examinations, then we split them. Those with the higher level of English would move into the English literature pathway, and those who still need support would be doing English as a second language. Now, the one downside of this system is that the English as a second language pathway, because of the way that the curriculum is structured, there is no time for them to cover anything literature. And we do hear a lot from the students that they really miss that aspect of learning. So that's something for us to think about in the future. And then in grade 12s, then they are doing IB, English language and literature, or English B. And in English B higher level, they still have the opportunity to study literature. Yes.
So all the texts in English as secondary language are not created. I mean, if they are from the newspapers or encyclopedia or anything like that, but not a created text. Like,
For the most part, no. They might have maybe a short poem that they would be looking at, but it wouldn't really be engaging in with it as a literary work. So that's what I see as, of course, I do, as a downside of of the English as a second language course. Now, I am both the right and the wrong person to be advocating for the inclusion of English literature into the language studies. Well, first of all, well, yes, I do have, all my degrees are in literature. I have studied in 4 different countries, literature in each of them. Oh, but also I started reading the classics in translation at the grade of 6, and by the grade of 9 I had read all the books in my grandmother's library, which is several hundred. So that's not normal, and I might be a little bit biased, but you know, so take it with a grain of salt. Okay, moving on. I already saw that in Flor's presentation, the why, what, and how, but it is important to notice that. So if you are an English language teacher, why would you include English in your curriculum? Because, you know, it seems that it's a lot of work. If you've never taught literature before, why would you bother if you can not do it? Because we're busy. We don't have time for this, you know, extra reading, finding out what to do. So we'll talk about that in a second. Also, how do you decide what to teach? If you have a set curriculum that prescribes certain works, then of course you don't have much choice. But on the other hand, if you have to decide yourself, there's so many things to choose from. How do you even start thinking about it? And then of course, well, how do you do it if you've never done it? So what kind of classroom activities? And we'll actually do a little classroom activity in just a second. Next slide, please. Okay, so why literature? So what is interesting in terms of research is that inclusion of literature in the language studies is currently undergoing a bit of a renaissance at the moment, because in the 70s and 80s, previously literature was a part of language studies. In the 70s and 80s, there was this idea language needs to be functional, so studying literature is a waste of time. It doesn't actually teach you any practical skills. You can't go to a shop and buy things that you need with literary knowledge, so why do it? And then in the early 80s, there was again this kind of interest started reappearing, and in the past decade, there's been so much research on all the ways in which studying literature is actually helpful and the way that it improves students' engagement with English and improvement of vocabulary and writing, etc., etc. It is really hard. I actually tried to find current new research that would argue against including literature. Either they don't talk about it at all, or it will be highly positive. But no one is saying, no, stop it, we really don't need to be doing that. That is not happening. Okay, so some of these are really obvious. So of course it improves reading comprehension. The more you read, the more you understand, and the more you understand, the more you can read, and it just goes on and on. Of course, it enhances vocabulary. So one of the things to do, those who were in the session with Fleur and Annette, again, using Quizlet, for example, for vocabulary learning. There is, however, a danger of if the text chosen is too complicated for the students and you would make them translate every single word, that will not be helpful. So we'll talk about it in a second. You do need to choose the appropriate level for the students, but also teach them understanding from context, because not every word is important. Some words are more important than others. Okay, so develops critical thinking skills, promotes cultural awareness. Yes, yes. But what, in my experience, has been the most important part is develops emotional intelligence. Because the reason why it is so successful for their language improvement, because students get really emotionally responsive to literary works. Sometimes they will be like, I hate it so much. Great. Tell me about it. What do you hate? What is it? You need to be able to verbalize it, and they will try. They will make presentations very detailed about all the ways that I hate this and don't want to do this. And that's fantastic. You know, no one said that everyone has to feel the same way, but also they get attached to the characters. They get invested in a character's, you know, success or failure. And it really just takes, the learning happens unnoticeably. It's just, you're so invested in what you're reading and suddenly you can just do things because you want to talk about it. You want to tell your classmates, and then there are results. Next, please. Okay, so let's say that you decided, okay, yeah, I'm going to give it a try. I will include literature in my English teaching curriculum. What do I teach? What do I even begin with? Well, let's start with what not to do. Do not teach Shakespeare in the original language to like A1 or A2 English learners, because there's no point. They will sit and look at you the whole lesson and there will be no improvement whatsoever. But you do need to make sure that texts are accessible. The great news is there are so many, I mean, I think for all the classics, you have also a beginner's text, intermediate version of text, and then that's a great way for differentiation. Some people will read Frankenstein in a beginner's version, where it's just like a bit longer summary, and some people will read the actual 19th century novel and be able to follow. Okay, so text would need to be relevant for the students. What do I mean by that? Do we only, I don't know, read something that's been published on the internet, fan fiction? No, not really. That's not what I mean. We can make anything relevant for them. Literature really mostly discusses themes that are timeless, about friendship, about human greed, about the human condition. And it's amazing when you are reading a novel about the 19th century that the students can't even think when that was. Is that even real dinosaurs? And then suddenly they see, oh my God, the characters are struggling with the same things that I'm struggling. We have, for example, a great example in Jane Eyre, 19th century novel. She is actually practicing positive self-talk, something that, you know, people can relate to. So that's something that you can consider. How do I take a text and then make it relevant for my students? Okay, this is my personal favorite, texts that are appropriate for the age level. Now, when I was going through my grandmother's library, I found this book placed behind other books. And of course I read it because it's a book. That was Lady Chatterley's Lover, and I was probably around 7 or 8, and that's considered to be, well, kind of pornographic. Not that I understood it. I was really confused and had no idea what's happening. So my grandmother did not appreciate the questions about male anatomy that I brought up later on. This is what I mean. We have to be careful about making sure that it's age appropriate. And I don't think anyone would do that in their classrooms. But it's just sometimes there are topics that maybe grade 6 students, they cannot really access. Maybe they don't want to be discussing it. Also, it is really worth trying to work with whole text. What I mean by that is, if you want to get the students to be really engaged and to really empathize with the characters and, you know, to want to continue reading, if you only use excerpts, you will not achieve that. Because there needs to be that investment. What is happening now? I'm at home and read a little bit more so that, you know, I can figure it out. So even if you're doing it little bit by little bit for the entire semester or even the entire year, it's still worthwhile doing it because of, you know, how well the students will understand the text afterwards. And if it's at all possible, it should be something you want to teach. I'm not saying it's impossible, because I just spent 3 months teaching Dickens, and Dickens and I don't get along yet. However, you can still make it work, right? You just have to think, how do I sell it to the students if I don't believe in it myself? And that's a lot of fun. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now the next. Well, how do I teach it? Okay, I selected the text. I figured out, you know, what I'm going to, but how do I do it? And again, this is the most important point. You have to sell it to your students. If they don't see that you are invested, that you're excited to be in front of them and teach it, doesn't matter that you hate it, they will not. You'll just have people sitting with blank faces in the classroom and looking at you. If you're lucky, they might be sleeping. So it's really hard to explain how to do it. But even though I hate Dickens, and I was I was very clear with my students. Okay, this is not what I would have chosen, and Dickens and I don't get along, but we will do it together. We'll suffer through it together. It's going to be fine. And what happened was that the students would try to find things and they'll say, Miss Sana, it's not that bad. Look at this. Look at how he explains that. That's great, isn't it? And I'll be like, okay. And so it's together, we went through it and they still quote Dickens to me. So I think, we did a good job. So we already talked about no, this was not about the age level, but identify the level of difficulty for your students. So what do you want to do? For example, we will try in a second a very easy task that doesn't really involve any kind of specific literary terminology or any knowledge of literature. We'll just be looking at the plot and investigating something. Students like to investigate. So you are detectives now. Can you find out what happened? And then, can you prove what are your proofs? Find it in a text. But you can also start, if you want to bring it a level up, you can start introducing a little bit of terminology. So look, that's a simile. Look, that's a metaphor, and that's a symbol. Let's work with that. We bring a bit of language in, we look deeper, we look at themes, or you can take it all the way up and you analyze every single word in a sentence. And then you look how it fits together and you bring in grammatical terms and then you spend 2 weeks looking at one passage. We did that. It was fun. So like no.
Yeah.
I still remember. You see, yeah, memorable. So choosing short stories and poetry works really well because it's a short text. You don't have to spend the entire semester, but you get to cover the entire text. Now, here's something I was very surprised to find out. Grade 6 boys enjoy poetry. I was shocked because during the break time, it looked like they will murder each other. But then they're like, oh my God, poetry is so much fun. We love it. Okay, we'll do more poetry then. But there's something about, counting rhymes, for example, or, again, poetry, you can investigate so much because nothing is clear. You have to read it, reread it, you look for clues, and they loved it. Okay, and then, another thing, you'd want students to be honest about how they feel about the text. If they hate it, let them hate it. Don't force them, no, it's a good novel. You love it. It's great. If you don't write an essay, it's a great novel, you get a 0. No, if they're able to justify their opinion, we hate some books, don't we? They're allowed to. And also welcoming student interpretations. If we're having a discussion and they understood the text very differently from how maybe it's classically interpreted, let them have it. Encourage them. Oh, that's a great point. Let's look at does anyone else have a different point? But they need to feel like this is something we're building together and my answers are correct as well, because that's the way I see it. Okay, then the next slide, please. Okay, I have put together a little Padlet. So for those who are online, if you scan this, then you would get the access to the Padlet. And then I'll give a second, and Miss Flora will put the Padlet up here in a second. So there are a couple of resources there. If you are considering including teaching literature in your class, there are some things that you can already use. I prepared for you, and you can see how to use them. And I'll show you something else interesting in just a second. Did it work?
Yeah, we just should verify.
Yes, some people do it for the first time.
Ah, okay. Yes. Break
It doesn't open it? It doesn't open it?
It does.
No, I mean for this lady. Because you can also use the camera. Where is that? No, don't take the photo, but it should I don't not have it over. Not in front of it.
Which is different.
Okay, it doesn't matter.
There will also, there will be my email address at the end of the presentation. I can-
Ah.
Yeah,
But
okay.
there's an ad coming up, I'm gonna have to get out of it.
No, sorry.
For those online just stakeholders doing the, yes, we will, Edgar will send out. Yeah.
Okay, let's open the Padlet.
Yes, you open the Padlet. There are a couple of interesting things that I wanted to show you.
Sorry, no, I have to. Oh, what was that? That sounded like
No, that's
Something-
ginger beer.
Rick.
Ginger.
No judgment.
Okay. So I have, I've added 3 sample tasks. We'll do one of them now. So I have an easy one, a medium difficulty, and then an advanced one. And there are some guidelines of how to use it if you want to. There's some great articles here that I added. This is, I don't actually have, I have access to the book, but I couldn't share it. This is a great book about the Japanese perspective of how to use literature in teaching English. And I've added some, a perspective from Sudan, from Malaysia, and I believe from China as well. There's the research from different countries is absolutely fascinating. So if you'd want to read, that is there. And then I wanted to talk, because everyone keeps talking about the ChatGPT. But ChatGPT is actually great. Now, on a personal level, do I think we will all die? Probably. But for preparing for the classroom, it's absolutely amazing. So let's say that you wanted to test whether the students understood the plot. Could you please open it, Ms. Blair? You have to be very specific in the prompt. Could we go back to the first page? And so I gave a prompt: create a multiple choice quiz of 10 points to test the student understanding of characters and setting in Dickens's Great Expectations. And it actually did. It gave all the questions with answers, but you have to be careful. So you cannot just ask ChatGPT to do something and then just give it to the students. Because, for example, this question makes no sense. Doesn't have anything to do with the text. It previously also invented some characters, you don't want that. So you check, so I added unclear and misleading, substitute for something else. But overall, the amount of time it saves is absolutely incredible. I used to spend an hour every evening creating quizzes. No, 30 seconds, we check it, quiz done. If you want to put it into Google Forms, for example, that would take extra 5 minutes. But for learning vocabulary or whatever, great tool, use it. Okay, can we go back to the Padlet? Yes, and I also added, in case you need additional resources, the British Council, they have a collection of stories and poems. They're not all fantastic, but you read them to see whether you like them, maybe you connect with something, and then you can use it. Okay, enough of me talking. We're going to try now to do a very easy level task. So we will all be analyzing, we'll not be analyzing the poem. I'll give you the poem that way.
Everyone needs different highlighter? And is that only one?
Yeah, one each, yeah. Of course. Okay. So this would be, for example, a class where students have never done poetry before. So you don't really want to start, analyzing literary devices with them and talking about the background of the author or anything like that, but a little task to get them engaged and introduced to literature. So the first thing that you do need to do, let's all number the lines. We start numbering from the first one all the way down to the bottom, because that will help when we start discussing. It will be a lot easier to identify which line you mean. There should be 24. Okay. So to begin with, I'll read a poem for you. You can follow along so that we actually understand what's happening. So what has happened to Lulu? What has happened to Lulu, mother? What has happened to Lulu? There's nothing in her bed but an old rag doll, and by its side a shoe. Why is her window wide, mother? The curtain flapping free, and only a circle on a dusty shelf where her money box used to be. Why do you turn your head, mother? And why do the teardrops fall? And why do you crumple that note on the fire and say it's nothing at all? I woke to voices late last night. I heard an engine roar. Why do you tell me the things I heard were a dream and nothing more? I heard somebody cry, mother, in anger or in pain. But now I ask you, why, mother? You say it was a gust of rain. Why do you wander about as though you don't know what to do? What has happened to Lulu, mother? What has happened to Lulu? I know. I have goosebumps, and I cry in a classroom quite often, so it's fine. Especially when we do poetry. Okay, so you are now, each one of you, you're an investigator who has been called to the house to find out what happened to Lulu. And your job is to gather all the evidence that you have in the text and come up with your explanation. So I will give you about 7 minutes to do it individually, and then you'll have a discussion in groups to see if you can come to some kind of conclusion, because we don't know what happened to Lulu, right? Lulu's missing, we need to find her. Okay, so we have 7 minutes now. Use the highlighters to find the words or phrases that you think are important.
I've got the timer if you want. How many minutes?
At 53 here.
But how many minutes?
7.
Okay.
Right, my apologies for those who are online. This is the first task on Padlet, so you can open it and follow along. I really apologize for not making that clear.
And I've shared the Padlet, I think.
If everyone at your table is done, you can start discussing, and you have to come up with one interpretation per table. So you have to find a way to agree and to convince the other people that your argument is the correct one.
No, really goes. Pushing for the system. Someone was an operation. She got around the whole time. Yeah. Mother. Yeah. That's all of us.
Yeah. Okay. And yes, they can like yeah. Long sweat. We don't need 3 hours since we went there.
On total 18 minutes, 19. I'm sorry about it's great. I really like it. I just feel I have to get this ready and then I'll be done.
Understood they all go to the same thing. They don't feel it. But usually because yes. Problem
In a hurry.
That's not what I do. That's all right.
Or
Yeah. Take it back. Yes.
Before when we didn't have a board, you will be disappointed. But now it's even. It's all done.
Those old games of extra.
Okay.
Export that. That's what it sounds.
No. Unless you're.
Or you then eventually her running away
Yeah.
with someone.
Just, ask you, so it's almost like. Yeah. Yes.
No, I see, yes. We could have, but the thing is,
Okay, well, I'd love to hear what you came up with. Who would like to start? Okay, no. Lady.
Okay. So, while we were analyzing the poem, I was counting the questions, what, why, where, why, how many times we think that it was the children who was asking the questions, asking mother was mentioned there 6 times, and I remember when we were analyzing the poems, yes, the number, how many times, for example, characters mentioned in the poem, they're related somehow to the poem. Yeah, and there was mentioned, while somebody was asking mother, where's the Lulu? Mother, don't answer the questions. No. And mother was crying, or she was in pain or in anger. So she missing someone. And this is her daughter, maybe, because only mother can sense these feelings. And why this person take the money as her, for the purpose. We think about the parents, they divorced and father living somewhere, I don't know, in another city. And the daughter wants to take the money to help his father to live longer or somehow for the purpose. And she loved a doll, so it's maybe her boy doll. And it's like lack of
childhood. So you're thinking parents divorce, so it's almost like a family dispute.
yeah.
The girls go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another option, maybe the girl is just struggling. And she just, she's grown up enough. And she and her mother maybe having disputes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic, thank you so much. Who's going next?
I guess we.
I guess, I love the excitement, I guess.
For.
But you have good skills.
We had great ideas of suicide and the like, but then we realized that windows, light, curtains, flat and free. So it seems that the window was used to run away. And old rag doll identifies that the person anywhere who ran away might be older than the one who's asking. And there is a shoe, one shoe on the side, so the person was not packing properly, so there is no normal moving out or something of that kind. And there is engine roar mentioned, what means that someone was speaking out that person who ran away. So maybe some unhappy love story mom is not happy about. Or something of that kind, because there is a note what goes into the fire, meaning that is not nice, something nice or meaningful written on the note, because mother is normal, do not tell anything that they agree with. So it should be something about love story against parents' will or something of that kind. And there was some argument going on because somebody cry in anger or in pain, it should be something loud enough to wake the young persons up. So I guess a happy love story for them. Or happy for them, but not happy for them.
We also have a contribution from someone online.
Okay, yes, we would like to hear.
So Carmen, yeah, sorry, you can go ahead.
So Lulu took the money box, line 7A, she left the house in a rush, she left line 4. Nice referencing of lines. Using the window instead of the door, let a note to her mom, and then other people can stop her or paying the mom access daughter's decision. Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Carmen. Wonderful. Very nice referencing of lines. I like that. You should take the exam. Okay, thank you so much. And
We, we had more or less similar, sort of points that everyone's already raised. But just towards the end, to listen, we sort of got back into the discussion. We think it's a mystery, of course, but it could even be that the man in the car is her father, and that she has perhaps chosen to live with him instead of mom as possible, and that could be why it was harder for her to let her go. That is one of the ideas. Someone else?
Sustainable side, and having fine with she's 18-year-old girl, and she just decided to break free and escape from her parents' control, and she's struggling with money involved, with the share of money, everything
She
is
saved
okay.
up.
She's free because the children were being free. It's definitely about freedom, and but your mom is angry because your mom was controlled, and the relationships were not healthy. And you decided to stay. There is something to think about for mom.
something to experience for the parents.
But she will get home, she will see the soup.
True, yeah, sure, yeah, that's true. She'll be back in a week. But you see, as you can see, you really require no prior knowledge of poetry to do this task, none whatsoever. It would be a good idea if the students have a bit lower level of English to go through the vocabulary. It's quite simple, but still just to identify that any words they don't understand. And then just having this discussion, students sometimes get really passionate about their ideas. There have been arguments that they take them out of the classroom afterwards. Like, no, Lulu didn't run away. She's dead. I heard all kinds of things. But if you wanted them to make this a little harder, you could, of course, then introduce the idea of a stanza, right? We have lines, and then when grouped together, they form stanzas. So let's see how the clues are distributed in each stanza, or repetition. You could talk about that. So just to make it a little more challenging. So it really depends on what you do with it. You can go very easy. It can be just a fun task, 15 minutes, we're done. Or it can be something you spend an entire lesson on. And it doesn't take a lot of preparation time. Students love it. It's something different. Then they're like, but Lulu, she's not a real person. They're like, yeah, but Lulu should have, lunch conversations afterwards. So yeah, if you're curious, if you want to see any of the other tasks that I placed there, so some are harder, some are not that hard. And of course, if you have any additional questions, you can always email me, and I'll be very happy.
So
to
is
answer.
there any answer what actually happened?
No.
According to
She's
the
probably not dead. And as you already pointed out, the presence of the engine, someone did pick her up, whether it's a boyfriend or father, we don't know for sure. It's likely that it's a boyfriend. It does seem like, this breaking free from the family. We don't hear anything about the father, though. So the father's absence could be significant. So yeah, we don't know, but it is actually an autobiographical poem. But the poet has never stated what actually happened. It's just that he was probably the speaker, the child, the little child telling the story. So you see, you already have questions. Literature is incredible. It's it draws everyone in.
Do you continue with the task to write what actually happened?
We did actually, yes, we actually wrote a rhymed poem afterwards, because we did talk about rhyme and how to, and so they wrote what happened from Lulu's perspective. And so then letting the students be creative and, create a similar rhythm and rhyme, but now you're Lulu. Tell us what happened. Where did you go? Something fun for students to do. I think, let me think, what else? I think I could open up for questions now if you have anything specific, because we still have a little bit of time and I'd be very happy to answer.
So is there any compulsory books you are certainly using each time?
Well, it would depend on the syllabus. So if we're talking about grades 6 to 8,
No, the big.
but if
Yes,
we're talking
big
about,
ones.
you know, for example, Cambridge, the literature and English course, it offers a selection of, I think, four or five novels, 15 poems, and then several plays, and then you pick. And it changes every 3 to 4 years, then you get different selections.
So we heard you don't like Dickens, but what are you choosing now?
Okay, so for example, for grades 11 and 12 in IB, I get to choose the entire curriculum what they read. I'm a Thomas Hardy scholar,
5
so of
minutes.
course. Yeah.
Just telling you this 5 minutes.
Oh, 5 minutes. So yeah, so of course they're reading Thomas Hardy. And I'm so excited about Thomas Hardy that as students have said, even if we didn't like it, we don't want to break your heart. But imagine but Hardy, because it's and then of course you get to choose things you are passionate about. So I really enjoy Marquez. And so then we're reading the novella by Marquez, we're reading some poetry by Imtiaz Darker, which questions religion. That's something that the students want to actually discuss in classroom. Yes.
I'm very new to appreciation of literature, and I see its potential totally as an English teacher. And I come more from the opposite side, so to evoke feelings for my students, because I see language as a communication through expression. And so I've used, of course, difficult tool of song lyrics and what they think about and how they feel it. So I've started moving on to literature for us as English teachers, our language teachers. We of course know more about the methodology and so on. Is there any sites that could be useful for us non-literature lovers that want to be and use the same tool? Is there any more sites that you come across that would be sort of language friendly for us? If that makes any sense. I suppose somebody who already knows literature and knowledgeable, so they could pick the right sort of levels like so. I wouldn't be able to do that just yet, but I wonder if there's any sites that would be sort of helpful for us.
So something that might be helpful, because what we're doing with the grades 6 to 8, if you are looking at the IB middle years program, that's quite similar, because they also do that. There's literature part and then there's the language part. And if you go and you just, for example, you write in MYP curriculum, so you get, there's a lot of curricula from different schools. And so you get to actually pick the year level and look at what other schools are doing. That's what I did initially when I first started, because I knew nothing about children's literature. I'm more a high school teacher, and you know, grade 6 was a world that I had no idea it existed. And so that might be very helpful. There's no specific website where you would go and everything is there. You could try ChatGPT. You could. Maybe it brings something up, but I found it really helpful. Yes, looking at the IB middle years program, and then there's some really great resources, because they link together the literary works with the grammar and with specific discussion topics. So that's helpful.
So you use both translated literature. No, I mean books which are not written originally in English.
In the IB program, that is a requirement, because it's a great discussion point. How does translation change a literary work? And while, for example, if you are teaching in a Latvian classroom where all the Latvian speakers or Russian speakers who know Latvian, what you could do is you could have a novel like Soviet Milk or Maltese Peasants. You have the Latvian and the translation. You can do a comparison. That's a great discussion point. Why are certain things translated that way? Why do we translate Maltese Peasants as Soviet Milk? Why do we bring, you know, that's a marketing strategy, which was quite openly admitted, right? So translation is actually also a great thing to look at. And you can ask students themselves translate something from their own language into English or any other. This doesn't apply just to English, just any language. In Latvian class, you would choose Latvian literature, of course. Yes.
I also have a question. I'm currently designing or making a program for the in-depth course for English, which I'll be teaching next year in fall. this year, we call. My question to you is how well do you think I should distribute the, let's say, classical literature, and how much should I add percentage-wise from newer authors? So how should that look like?
I would probably, so my understanding is it's good, they do need to know some classics, right? They do need to know who Shakespeare is, what he has written. And if you put in even Romeo and Juliet, which is one of the, I see it as a simpler plays, but a lot to discuss, there's so much wrong with it. Then we were not going to start that discussion right now. Yes, but also, for example, yeah, you could choose Dickens, Hardy, any of the Bronte sisters. So something is classical, but then of course something more modern, and then you can compare, you can see how the writing changes. And it is a good idea to introduce the different genre, of course, to have prose, to have play, and to have a poem, because you read each of them different. And the idea that plays, they don't read well. We don't, plays are meant for acting on a stage, so you can even act it out with your students in a class, some parts of it. So there's, yeah, I would say go with at least one classic.
Yeah.
And Jane Eyre is great. I don't like that one either. But from a point of view of women's rights and just the general interpretation of how the society works and social class, fantastic.
We still have about 3 minutes for questions.
You mentioned about metaphors, story, and similes, yes? But you are not a literature teacher. For example, I'm an English language teacher and I also teach literature, for example, or in some elements of literature. Where do I have to learn these metaphors and similes myself?
There are amazing resources online. So there is, I'm not sure if Einstein actually said it, but people say Einstein said, if you can't explain it to a 5-year-old, you don't know it yourself. And so in terms of explaining metaphors and similes, there's this incredible video that is 1 minute long, and it explains a metaphor and simile at the same time. And it's, there's a man and there's a lion. And if it's a simile, there will be a like or as. He is as strong as a lion. And then if it's a metaphor, then you will say the man is a lion, and then it moves the two of them together. And it's a hybrid.
Watch different YouTube
Yes.
videos, and then based on that, find these examples in the literary text.
Yes.
Yes.
That they really help because they're very short, brief, and you actually understand it. You can of course read also, there's a lot of text. If you sign up to Lit Charts, then they offer an entire, there's over 1,000 different literary terms, and explanation goes on like 3 to 4 pages. You can also do that if you want to do in depth, but the videos are really much.
Okay.
Much.
Remember, Zana, when we were on a distance learning in 9th grade? It was my favorite time. We used the one tool. I can remember your website. When you remember, we first do lots of sessions. When we used
Quill, was it
like
Quill?
studying
Oh, Quill,
Quill, like something.
because you did writing and grammar, right?
No, when you put like similar Juliet, the things when they have a short like extract of text, and then we have a question for that, and we answer
Edge puzzle.
something different. But this was good because after that we have a percentage, and you look at our results, and you kind of tell us what we can improve.
That sounds like that puzzle.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
sounds
but
like
we-
a puzzle.
And there is was video to explanation, then
That's
it's
definitely a
answering.
puzzle. Yes. So for those who haven't used that puzzle, it still exists. It's just we're not online, don't use it anymore. But you can add a video, for example, about man and lion and similes and metaphors, and then you can insert at any point. Students are watching it, and at any point it stops, and you insert a question. What is a simile? And students have to type it in, and they cannot continue watching until they have answered the question. And you can choose anything really. That can be a summary of Shakespeare's Othello, and they have to watch it, and you're able to track how much they watched and followed. So that's something they could do at home, for example. We don't spend lesson time doing that anymore. But COVID is supposedly over. Supposedly.
Difficult tasks in your school.
In the literature class, it's mostly reading. I mostly tell them read the next 4 chapters for next. We do so much reading in my classes because it's advanced literature.
Like essay writing, do you do?
Essay writing in class.
Like what kind of essay?
So it depends. For example, for the IGCSE class, there's certain types of essays that they need to write, and so they would have a passage and there's a question: how does the author create an atmosphere of fear in this passage? And then they have to analyze the passage. They have 45 minutes to write an essay. That happens in class.
How many words?
Ideally 1,000, usually 650 up.
We'll have to stop the question here, but please do talk to
can-
Zana, and I know that you will have so many other questions. Now, when I said at the beginning, the famous Zana, you can see why. This is, a teacher that every single student in the school wants to be taught by, and we have to push them away. I'm sure you can see where that comes from, that passion and knowledge. So thank you again, Zana, for sharing your expertise and also your real care in wanting to transfer that knowledge and passion for literature. So thank you again. And as a mother, in fact, as well, I appreciate that. So,
the last slide of the presentation, because my email is there. In case you have any questions and want to contact me, feel free. I can't speak it. So there you go. So Zana Lindy at Exupery, and feel free to write. I'll be very happy to.
thank you.
And thank you for being here. It really was great.